always hear Pepper Mills when I hear this.
More grinding, less.
Sorry, I'm pulling on my halter. Welcome back. We're here to now go back to the beginning of the bill. So section 2, I just want to put a pin in it for now and just say, did the kumbaya last through the reading of the bill? And is this something that we want to strongly consider for this bill? Maybe just head nods is fine for right now. Yep. So we're left with section 1, section 3 to talk about, and then the possible amendment of adding the assistant attorneys general. But while we have Damien, I want to just do a quick walkthrough again of what section 1 is. I've not heard any possible language changes. But I just want to make sure that we talk about what exactly this is, what exactly it does, and who it affects. I want to be really kind of stated as clearly as possible. We don't need to go to a section by section, this allows and this allows and this allows, but I just want to make sure. I mean, that can be part of the conversation. I wouldn't shut that down, but I just want to make sure that we understand that section 1 is about captive audiences. And I mean, I'll throw out my understanding of it or what I've been working with, and we can dent it or, say, no, that's not right. I'm fine being corrected. This bill limits. Let me start again. This bill allows captive audience meetings on political matters to happen or religious matters to happen, but it prohibits an employer from penalizing employees who choose to leave those meetings. And that fits under this category, this First Amendment category of everybody has a right to say whatever they need to say, whatever they want to say. And everybody has a right to not hear it or to not listen to it and to be able to express their First Amendment rights that way. And through conversation, testimony, interpretation by legislative counsel, right now the consensus is that this bill retains everyone's First Amendment rights, defines what political matters are, and further, we took testimony from people that have said that this does not, and while there may be court cases still active, that this doesn't preempt federal law, or it can't preempt federal law, but we are allowed as a state to determine what work conditions can be. And finally, this piece affects every employer in the state that would hold these meetings. Did I get most of that right?
Mostly, yeah. So key pieces, yeah, that this affects all employers. It applies to more than just collective bargaining, speech related to a collective bargaining drive where the union may want to have so it would prohibit mandatory meetings to discuss a union drive. As the chair alluded to, there is ongoing litigation in the Second Circuit related to a similar law in Connecticut. And if that litigation comes out with finding that that law is preempted to the extent it interferes with the National Labor Relations Act, our law would also be preempted to the extent that it relates to those to meetings to discuss membership in or joining a union or forming a union for purposes of collective bargaining. If that case reaches the First Amendment issue, you could have a broader holding related to potential restrictions on First Amendment. This bill is trying to sort of walk that fine line where it allows people to have speech, but doesn't require people to listen to it. Don't know where the courts will come out, but the bill is trying to walk that line, and we'll have to see what happens in Connecticut if you choose to move forward with it. And this wouldn't be the first time that we've had a bill or a law that we've passed, which has been subject to litigation elsewhere. Sometimes it comes out and the law stays in effect. Sometimes it comes out the other way and the law may stay on the books or it may not. But we can just no longer enforce it in that instance. So,
Representative James, the Chestnut Chancellor.
I just heard two things that seemed a little bit different to me. I heard Chair Stevens say that it allows captive audience meetings to happen, but employers can't penalize an employee who chooses to
So-
what? And then I heard you say something that was closer to my understanding, which is that when I hear captive audience, I think of a meeting an employer holds where it says we're having all employees are required to be there at 2:00. Everybody show up. And then if somebody raises their hand and says, well, I'm not going to come, they can't be penalized. To me, that's what I heard Chair Stevens say. My understanding was a little bit different, which was that I thought that employer could say, we are going to have a meeting today at 2:00 to discuss politics or religion or the collective bargaining efforts that are going on here in our workplace. We hope you will attend. Those are two different things in my mind,
so
but you're not required to attend. To me, that's different levels of coercion. The first sounds more coercive to me.
yep. So the law says, or the bill says that an employer, one, is not permitted to in any way penalize or threaten an employee because the employee declines to either attend or participate in the employer-sponsored meeting on a political or religious issue, or to view or participate in communications on a political or religious issue. So declines to view or participate. The bill then goes on to say that you also cannot use coercion, threats of discharge or discipline to require an employee to attend. So, and this is, I think, getting to the distinction you're drawing, or to view or participate in communications. But it does not prevent an employer from saying, we're having a meeting to discuss this. Attendance is not mandatory, but you're encouraged to attend. And the bill does go on to say that. I think it's maybe a little closer to what you're describing, Representative James, where it is not expressly clear saying that, I'm scheduling a meeting for all employees to discuss the union. I think to be safe there, an employer would have to say attendance is not mandatory, but it is encouraged. So versus saying, I'm scheduling a meeting for everyone to attend, and then employees having to know that I can say no and I won't be penalized, or I can't be penalized for that. So I think that the way the law is written, it clearly says you're okay if you say this is not mandatory. And I think that's where I would read that. I think the rest of the area you're skating in some very dark gray area that may be off into the realm of violating the law, because there's implied coercion there when you say this is mandatory or all employees are expected to attend, and then you're expecting employees to know that they can say, I don't have to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Representative Eldridge on the bottom. Yeah, just, we kind of, the way that I read this section of law is that captive meetings are a thing that we are making not allowed. And it's kind of like, so captive meetings have been described as a meeting where you have to go and listen to an agenda, be it political or religious. And if you don't, there's a penalty, and that would be a captive meeting. And with the passage of this section, you cannot have captive meetings because they're by definition not captive because you can leave without penalty. You can still have meetings that cover these subjects, but they are not going to be captive meetings anymore because of this
You can
section.
still have captive meetings as long as they're work related.
Yes.
Well, yes, I mean, I would just call that a work meeting. I mean, I don't know if any work meeting is called a captive meeting. I wouldn't go so far as to say that. Like, hey, we have a Monday morning standing meeting to discuss sales. Is that a captive meeting? I don't think so. I think we've kind of defined what a captive meeting is. It's a meeting that speaks to these certain topics. So I would say that no, there won't be any more captive meetings. There will still be mandatory work meetings that have nothing to do with politics and religion, but to me, that is by definition not a captive meeting.
Yeah, to be clear, we never use the term captive here. That's so I think what Representative Elder is getting to is, to some extent, like as an employer saying, I'm going to have a captive meeting, really, that's pretty poor branding of your meeting. But yeah, this is preventing people from being forced to attend a meeting against their will that relates to political and religious matters.
Yes.
It does not apply to what Representative Elder is calling work meetings, where it's mandatory training, something you're required to share by law, or something that's necessary to do the job. So, for example, I'm getting a job in a factory and I need to learn how to use the machine that I'm going to be operating. I can't say, I'm not going to that meeting because I can't do my job. And so that falls under the necessary for the employee to do their job meeting. Same thing, I'm having a meeting where I'm handing out assignments for the day. Can't skip that meeting. Not going to know what you need to do for the day. It's different than saying I'm having a meeting where we're going to ask all employees to attend the meeting, and I'm going to penalize them if they don't attend. And while we're there, we're going to engage in scripture readings and prayers from my religion that my employees may or may not share. And they will be penalized if they don't go. And I'm not a religious organization. So,
Sorry, but just to be clear, so that Representative Elder and I are speaking the same language. Mandatory meetings are allowed, company meetings. And the mandatory part being that if we're talking about our regular Monday meeting, we're talking about sales targets. You've missed the last two. I am going to penalize you for missing those meetings. That is allowable under the, should this take. If the same meeting is going to have a component of political or religious action, it would be incumbent upon the employer to say, hold the regular meeting, and then clearly say the next 15 minutes are optional. You can stay if you like, leave if you like. We're going to discuss my opinions on whatever.
yeah, you could say, that concludes the employment portion. And for the next portion, we have a speaker that I've invited to talk about, this political issue or this religious issue. You can do things like say, we're having a voluntary Bible or scripture or prayer group. Nothing prevents the employer from doing that as long as it's voluntary. We're having breakfasts with political candidates, and the employer chooses the political candidates, but they're voluntary breakfasts. And I think at that point, it's also incumbent on the employer to ensure that they don't, if they're hoping to avoid any controversy, that there's no perceived discrimination against employees who choose not to attend. So, if everyone who attends the meeting gets a promotion or a raise, or gets overtime pay or something like that, you'd have a discrimination complaint.
I'm sorry, I jumped in front of Representative
That's
Levin.
pretty much what I was gonna say anyways, was that, you can have a safety meeting, get everybody there, and then start talking about union busting. And then the people have the opportunity to walk out, but let's say right after that, you're gonna have your safety meeting and the people aren't there. And that's, really important, and they have every right to have people there for a safety meeting. And that can work the other way around, which would be the best way is to talk about the safety meeting and then say, okay, now I got a speaker here going to talk about union busting.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things too to just make sure we keep in mind. So one is the primary purpose of the meeting. So if let's say you have a safety meeting, and at the end of the meeting, you wander off topic and talk about, start expanding on your opinions on the current union drive, candidates for Congress in your district, in Vermont, because we're one district, candidates for state rep in your district, things like that, religious issues. At that point, your employees could ask, is the meeting done? And they could leave. But I think if it's sort of an incidental, slipped off topic, get back on topic, you haven't affected the primary purpose. If it's, oh, hey, we're having a safety meeting and we do 2 minutes of safety talk and we've got 58 minutes left in the meeting, and I'm now turning on my PowerPoint on, candidates I want you to vote for in November's election.
Well, that's
Then your primary purpose is clearly different. Some of these things are going to be fact specific.
Yeah.
And we can go through hypotheticals, probably until adjournment day and beyond, and keep coming up with new examples and trying to figure out how it comes out. The reality of these things is, employers are going to have to, if you pass this, employers will need to think twice about what they're speaking about or addressing in communications and meetings, and whether they're making it mandatory. They will need to say, is this a safety meeting? Am I speaking about safety? Or is this a meeting where I want to speak about a political issue? I want to speak about union membership. I want to speak about religion. If the answer is the latter, or that's the primary purpose, they're going to have to think about saying attendance is voluntary, something like that, to make it clear to their employees that they're not going to be penalized or not required to attend. The other thing is they're going to have to think about if they want to, it's Friday morning, we set aside an hour on Friday morning for meetings. If you want the first half hour to be on work-related issues, the, plan for Q3, and then the second half hour to be on the upcoming election, then you likely a good practice for employers would be to split the meeting and say, okay, we've covered the Q3 stuff. Folks are welcome to, go on with their day, or to stick around and we can talk about the election and what I think would be best for the company in the coming election. And it's that's what this is. And I think the question is this I can't speak to the issue of the policy issue of is this good policy or not. Some states have adopted laws like this. Some have chosen not to. Right now, the question is, does this make sense for you? There will be gray area. There always is in employment.
Yeah,
law.
again, I
There's
mean,
this-
my main concern would be, like I said, they want to talk about safety, that's the thing, but when they get there, they talk about something else, and the person, well, I don't want to have any part of this, so they leave. And they're not there for the safety meeting because they don't know when the safety meeting is going to start, then that person could get, dinged for something. Now, if they had it at the beginning where they talked about safety and they're all done, and then they talk about whatever politics, then that individual has the opportunity to leave, but that's the difference,
Yeah, and I hear the difference. I'm not sure I can resolve
Yeah,
exactly how the law would deal with that. Because I think what you're gonna find is that you will have things where it's sort of a sticky. Where it's not a clear line.
Yeah.
And the facts are challenging. That is inevitably when these things end up getting resolved. Maybe not all of them, but some of them do end up in litigation. And this happens throughout employment law. There are cases where best efforts by the employer in good faith, best efforts by the employees in good faith, and for whatever reason, they end up in dispute over what the right outcome should have been, whether it's discrimination, wage and hour, leave law, unemployment, workers' comp. And this would be no different than those, that there is going to be gray area that the law doesn't address because we can't come up with every hypothetical. I think the question here is this a good balance on the surface that we think addresses most of the issues and at least provides some clear guidance? Or is this creating either more restriction than you think is appropriate, or is there confusion and ambiguity in here that's going to make it difficult for either employees to know what their rights are or employers to know where they need to draw the line in order to stay in compliance with the law? So, and yeah, I think the example you give, depending on the facts, it could go either way. And there are other questions like, is there a way for the employer to say, hey, come back in 15 minutes? Is there, an opportunity for the employer to say, you're right, it's the second half of the meeting, let's do safety now, and we'll move on? Or, what are the facts around what the employee leaves? And how that communicates. So I don't want to spend the whole
I have Representative Justin Tangerman, Parsons, Elder, and Lamont.
And
Boroughs. So, Robin,
I will make mine as quick as possible because it's a lot of what Representative LaBounty was just saying. But in the definition of political matters, the last line is any political to talk about political, civic, community, fraternal, or labor organizations.
It's to join or support a political party or a political, civic, community, fraternal, or labor organization.
And my I guess my question is, we're talking about that clarity of this is business related, this is optional. And
Right.
and is that something like, a company, we're supporting the United Way Canned Food Drive civic organization. It's not about joining, but it's about supporting. And I don't mean to do fuzzy hypotheticals, but it seems like it would be applicable where best practice would be, this is the voluntary part of the meeting.
Mm-hmm. So let me push back on that.
Okay, please.
And so I think, again, that would be the voluntary part of the meeting here. And I think, so you could say this part of meeting where we're talking about supporting the local food bank, maybe not everyone there wants to talk about charitable giving. Or wants to participate in that. Employees may have their own charities. They may not agree with the employer's charity. In some instances, they may say, well, I don't agree with the way that charity spends its money. They spend, and then in some instances you have civic and charitable organizations that may have religious or political overtones. So that people may not agree with for whatever reason. So, and I'm not saying that this is the right policy, but I'm saying it gets really hard to draw the line. So without singling out a group, imagine you have, ABC Charities. It's a large regional charity. Ostensibly, they do a lot of good work in the community. They give to all sorts of causes that people generally support. Unfortunately, they also had a scandal where it turned out that their CEO was embezzling money. That may have been years ago. They may have fixed their books, but some people may say we don't give to them anymore. And that can be an issue where employees don't want to sit there. So I think that's what this is trying to protect against. I'm not saying that's the right way to draw the line. But you can also end up with, a group where it's Religion X Charities International, where they may provide meals and drinking water and medical supplies to impoverished communities around the world, but they also do it with a flavor of proselytizing. And people may not be comfortable with that. So.
And is this, I believe that you said these definitions were based on Connecticut's?
I believe we based this on a proposed law in New York. But yeah, it's very similar to Connecticut's language. So again, I can't tell you this is the right place to draw the line, but I think what it's trying to protect against is that it's sweeping broad.
Yeah.
In an effort to avoid creating a carve out. Well, that's not
Thank you.
right.
Representative Parsons, you okay?
No, I'm good.
Okay, Representative Elder, and then Lamont, and then Burrows, and then James.
Yeah, just a couple of things. One sort of observation, maybe I've got it wrong, but we don't use the term captive meeting in here because we don't really use that term in statute because to some degree we're trying to prove a negative, which is to say we don't want captive meeting laws, which is a bit of a term of art. So therefore, we're going to set about to define the things that would make something a captive meeting law, and we're going to disallow those practices. And so what we're left with is a series of restrictions on employers, because of course, at the base of this, there's an assumption that you show up every day for a paycheck, your boss can tell you what to do, right? So this is a carve out to that. This is saying, but your boss can't do this, and your boss can't do that, because if it could, we would call that a captive meeting law. And so it is just this sort of interesting thing where we've kind of defined something somewhat colloquially and for a very real policy purpose, but that it is not defined in state law. To Dennis's point, I would say, and I know that this bill says a meeting with the main purpose, the primary purpose. But I would say that if you have a meeting within a meeting where the one meeting that would not violate these rules because it's a forklift safety training, is then quickly and without announcement superseded by an internal meeting about, why not to organize with the, forklift union. That is a violation of this law, I think clearly, and would be subject to a labor board action. I could have that wrong, but it just seems to me that you can't hide a meeting within a meeting when the hidden meeting clearly violates the purpose. And I do think of the gray areas, but I also think at a certain point, what we're trying to do is a little more straightforward than every single what if scenario. And of course, it will have to be revisited, but what we're trying to do on its face, I think, is fairly straightforward. which is to say, of course, your employer can tell you what to do with your day, but for these examples defined here. And to me, that's just like a helpful, that's the way that I frame it, because if I kind of get into if I come in from the other side of what are all the iterations that might test this theory, then I think there's a little bit of a risk of not seeing the forest for the trees.
You have a comment on that,
I
or,
do.
yeah, then I'll let you jump along.
Okay, this is just very quick, and I just want to sort of reiterate what Caleb said, which this seems like a very, very important provision to me. Employees should not be required to sit in a meeting, a mandatory meeting for these purposes, and the employer still has an awful lot of leeway and an awful lot of clout. So to me, I haven't struggled with this topic at all, in any way at all. I think it's important that we're clarifying it and really understanding all the iterations, but I don't think employers should be allowed to do that. And they still have a lot of other ways that they can communicate with their employees rather than making them sit in a room and listen to political and religious opinions.
All right, Representative Lamont and then Burrows.
Thank you. So it's sort of mute at this point because there was similar train of thought. But I just wanted clarification from Jamie and because I unions aside, talking about employers and employees and captive meetings and intentions of the meetings, we said they are allowed to hold meetings that are required for you to do your job. And so if in fact, like, we didn't hear testimony on folks actually not attending a meeting because of their rights not to do that, or or I don't know, maybe we did hear about losing their position. But I feel like we heard testimony about a person or a couple of people who were unable to attend meetings or should have been unable to attend meetings. And I think that keeps getting lost in translation. And I'm just saying, outside of unions, if someone were to miss a meeting because they were in the hospital per se, what then? And I can say, I know employers do fire people for missing meetings or work because they are in the hospital, which is unjust. And so is this not to counter that so that they cannot be penalized for missing a meeting, regardless of the reason why they're missing the meeting? And then would that not say that if it was in fact a meeting that was required for them to do their job, why do they not have the opportunity to do that as a later time when there's not this other topic being discussed, and or they happen to be incapacitated at the time and unable to attend the meeting?
So I want to be really clear. This does not permit employees to miss just any meeting that's required to do their job.
Exactly.
For any reason. It's not permitting that. It's permitting employees not to attend a meeting where the primary purpose of the meeting is to express the employer's opinion on a religious or political issue. So an employer safety meeting, on mandatory training under state law, meetings related to doing your job, planning meetings. I have a staff meeting every Monday morning during the session. I would not get to miss that meeting as a result of this law.
Yeah,
If I was
understand.
incapacitated, I could email my boss and say, I'm sick, I'm at the hospital, I can't make the meeting. Can I talk to you later? But nothing relieves an employee of those obligations. The difference is if I showed up at the meeting and my boss said everyone has to stay around, and we're going to talk about why I think it's incumbent on all of you attending this meeting to vote a certain way in the upcoming election. That would be impermissible.
Well,
So,
as it was just stated, so it's the primary reason. So if it's a secondary reason, the employer should have to disclose that, correct?
uh, nothing in this bill requires an employer to disclose like secondary reasons for a meeting. The way I read the primary purpose piece is it prevents employers from getting caught up if they make an incidental comment about the union or about a political issue or about a religious issue and it slips in. It basically, it prevents this from being a automatic liability if you make any misstatement or misstep or slip off topic for a few minutes. But it does provide liability if the whole purpose of the meeting was to address a topic that this says you can't make a mandatory topic.
Thank
That's really
you.
what this is doing.
Thank you.
Representative Burrows.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions about the definition of religious.
Sure.
First of all, as I have it written down from the bill, religious matters, quote, religious matters, unquote, means matters relating to religious affiliation and practice and the decision to join or support any denomination, organization, or institution. So my first question is that an equation? So does it mean matters of relating to religious affiliation and practice and the decision to join or support? Or should those be ors?
Oh. I see what you're saying. And
It changes the meaning.
yes, matters relating to religious affiliation or religious practice or the decision to join or support any religious or denominational organization or institution. I think you're right. And you probably would say, yeah, matters relating to religious affiliation, comma, religious practice. Well, no, yeah, you could just say, or religious practice, comma, or the decision to join or support any religious or denominational organization or institution.
Because am I right in
No, I
my
think you're-
interpretation that it's and?
I think you're right that
And-
it creates ambiguity.
Yeah.
That it would have to be this and this. Yeah. I think you can separate out religious affiliation and practice from the decision to join or support.
Right.
The way the sentence is constructed, but I think so that may be something you want to include as a potential change. It's just proposing changing those to ors so that can be any one.
Well, then I throw this out because, so that was part one of my question. And if we did change it to or, then it becomes ambiguous. Then the part that becomes ambiguous is
What if you talked about all of them?
no.
Okay.
But it sort of separates them, right? So then what if the owner or leader or CEO, whatever, of that head honcho of the company has a mandatory meeting, in which they're not talking about, but and it's not a religious company, but the head honcho of the company is extremely pious and peppers whatever they're talking about with.
So
I know that's a what if, but it's just to say that it makes it the religious affiliation part, uncoupling it from the equation makes it more ambiguous.
yeah, so I think there's a difference between peppering your speech with
That's why I looked it up in the first place, though.
so I think there's a there's a difference between peppering your speech with things like, you know, God
You wouldn't pepper your
bless
speech
you
with,
and things like that.
with political or labor oriented, we don't think about that, but
I mean, so.
Kind of hum Woody Guthrie tunes all through the day, I guess.
yeah, or the Christmas party.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or Rage Against the Machine.
Right.
Talking about mandatory attendance at meetings though.
So I think what the question is if you have a manager, let's say, who peppers their speech with sort of religious-isms, I'll call them, does that change it to a discussion relating to religious affiliation or practice, or the decision to join or support religious or denominational organization or institution? And I don't think it does. And I think the reason is because it's different from, so there's a difference between saying things like God bless you, or whatever deity you believe in, bless you, or I'm going to be praying on that tonight, versus saying, it'd be really good if I saw more of you at Mass on Sunday morning, or at temple on whatever day, whatever it is. That's a big difference, because
well, that goes back
one
to
is
the
sort of-
and versus or.
And I would propose that this should probably be phrased similar to political matters, where it's a listing. So it'd be religious affiliation, religious practice, the decision to join or support a religious or denominational organization or institution, or any combination of the preceding topics. And political matters probably should be matters relating to political affiliation, the decision to join or support any political, list all the organizations, or any combination of the preceding. And I would say the key here, though, is I think when you're saying something like, God bless you, I'm going to pray about that, it's not a question of that. That's like an exclamation in your speech versus something where your message is clearly, I want to talk to you about your religious or your political affiliation. So it's the same thing. If you make a joke about a politician versus saying, well, I really hope you're going to be voting for blank on Tuesday. Because if you don't, that's going to really affect the way things go here at work. Let's talk about why so-and-so's stance on property taxes is bad for this company, or their stance on corporate income tax, more likely, it's bad for this company, or their stance on employment laws, or their stance on land use, their stance on regulation of this industry, their stance on regulation of our competitors, whatever it is. Same thing with religious matters. So there's a difference between saying, making a brief comment that alludes to your own religion, or making a comment about religious conflict occurring in another part of the world or within your community, versus saying, let's talk about how you are, what you're affiliated with, how you practice, or whether you should join or support this religious group in the community. Because that's really what we're getting at here. And I think it's really, one thing we need to be clear of is, if we were outlawing people from mentioning religion ever, That is clearly an overbroad restriction on speech, and it is not narrowly tailored in any way, shape, or form. And we'd be running into some very clear First Amendment violations. The problem here is you're trying to basically prevent people from being subjected to proselytization or discrimination because they're not willing to discuss a message. And I think religious matters relating to religious practice includes prayer meetings, includes saying things like, well, let us pray. And then I'm gonna, deliver a prayer or benediction, etc., and require you to be there. Versus saying, for anyone who'd like to stay around, I'd like to say a prayer of thanks. So, and there's nothing wrong with being open about your religious belief. And this isn't preventing that. What it is preventing is people saying, you have to sit in this room or I'm going to penalize you in your employment so that I can talk to you about why you should share my political or my religious opinions. So that's where this is going. I'm happy to work to tweak this definition so we can get there, but I think the key is looking at affiliation, practice, and joining or supporting versus just making an offhand comment. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay. Question from Representative Labor. I want to be respectful of your time. It's 11:30.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'll make it short and sweet. And it's good, Damien.
I'll try to.
Under other.
Yep.
Open meeting law. This is just a question of propriety of setting up an agenda. Want a meeting to instruct, teach, and do the safety work on a new Eisner forklift or whatever. And once that agenda is done, you could have a secondary agenda on that meeting, listing things that would be discussed that you can voluntarily stay or leave on with no penalty.
Absolutely. Yep.
That cover a lot of this.
Yeah. That would be absolutely permissible. Yeah. 100%. Same thing if you said at 9 o'clock, we're going to be talking about this list of things. At 9:30, everyone has to be there by 9:30 for the discussion of how to operate the new forklift and key safety features you all need to be aware of. Yeah.
Okay, so would you prepare language suggested by Representative Burrows, please?
I will.
Over the afternoon. It does not look like we will be in a position to vote on this afternoon. But floor, I can't tell whether the floor is long or short.
That's the end blocked out now.
So we will meet 15 minutes after the floor to pick up the conversation on both sections. If there's any more conversation about this piece, but then move on to section 3 and then discuss the possible amendment from the assistant about the assistant attorneys general. So
Yes.
but I think we will, I don't see us being able to keep working through like this and this kind of conversation to be able to vote on this afternoon. So I appreciate all the clarifying questions. But Damien needs to get downstairs. So
Do. Just a heads up for this afternoon, I do have a couple bills on the Senate floor, so I may have to step in and out. But they're expecting an extremely long floor today, so.
well, if we're not on the floor for altogether too long, then that still gives us a couple hours to work. So
Great.
so Dan, Ron, just put on for tomorrow the discussion of possible vote.
So if we need to give a job, something set.
If we need be. Again,
If we have the time.
yeah, I mean, the last I heard things about 687, everything is so fractured downstairs, so it's, I don't know if Anyway, we'll work that out. Everybody, we'll go up live and we can take lunch now.